what Jake Hutchinson has to say from Niners HQ, our own on the scene here on Willard and Dibs. First of all, hey, Jake, what's cooking, man?
What's going on? Thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, so what's it look like down there right now? How would you rate the possibility of a big trade here in the next hour or two?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough. I think there's a lot of receivers who cost way less than Deebo Samuel, who are young, who you could pair with, if you're like the Patriots, like a Drake May. That said, I think Deebo would be a really good fit for the Patriots because he's a guy with a young quarterback. He can just kind of dink and dunk the ball around. I gut feeling don't think they're going to move him, but I think that could trade if somebody comes up, with a second-round pick. I could see the 49ers, taking a second, maybe throwing in like 124 to do that. But my gut is Deebo doesn't get dealt, but that's not the strongest gut feeling I've ever had.
Yeah, it feels more and more as we get deeper. And I was mentioning to Mark, if we get past Washington at 40, because we know that New England likely needs a receiver, and maybe they would have taken one here, but the Chargers also need a receiver, and it feels like they're about to take one here. So if they don't end up trading Deebo, how do you think that the troika of Deebo, Aiyuk, and Pearsall will look with a team that only uses two wide receivers most of the time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I was just talking about that with all the other reporters down here, all of whom are very hungry and getting increasingly cranky by the second, which they're already cranky as they are. But I think it's a question of, do you just rotate Deebo more? I mean, he's a guy who's had issues staying healthy, staying fresh throughout the season. And I think Pearsall is a guy you can play. He played a lot in the slot, but he can play anywhere. And I think the 49ers might have an interest in rotating Deebo a little more, getting Pearsall involved. Like, he's not a guy that's just going to be played like Ronnie Bell, like, once every few games, or, you get five offensive plays a game. Like, he's going to be involved, but I think Deebo makes the most sense in terms of keeping him fresh, rotating him out a little bit. And it's also a situation where Deebo's going to get hurt at some point this season. Christian McCaffrey will probably have something he's dealing with. Pearsall is insurance against all of that. And, if you hold on to Deebo, you just have an insane receiver in Pearsall, who's a guy I love, who I think can play truly anywhere, elite athleticism, like tracks the ball better than any receiver in this class. You just have a guy who's ready to play day one and could probably return punts for you. Maybe the value wasn't what people wanted it to be, but he is a stellar player that I feel very, very confident about in the 49ers offense.
All right, with the 34th pick in the draft, the Chargers, who traded up, select wide receiver Ladd McConkey from Georgia. So wide receivers to both of the 33rd and 34th slot, and they've got nothing to do with Deebo Samuel or Brandon Aiyuk. We're talking with our own Jake Hutchinson here on Willard and Dibs, who's at Niners HQ. More on this, because I'm interested, and your gut feeling that Deebo stays tonight. If that's the case, what do you see as sort of the residual effect for both of the Niners wide receivers in all that's been discussed over the last few weeks?
I think it's something where, listen, I think they're going to be used to it a little bit. For Aiyuk specifically, it's something where this is how the negotiations go with the 49ers. Some teams, like the Eagles and the Lions, they just say, okay, we love you. We're going to pay you. The 49ers go, we love you. Why don't we stress everyone out over the next few months and bring this thing up to the finish line as slowly and as agonizingly as we can, because we want to get the most value. And for the most part, it's worked. That said, you do burn through goodwill a little bit by doing that. And with Deebo, it's interesting if as they reportedly promised, that he would not be traded, if he hears that from them and then they go out and they are actively trying to trade him, that's something that might piss him off. That said, a pissed off Deebo Samuel, maybe not the worst thing in the world.
Right. And let's talk about that quote unquote promise for a minute, because we've heard about this. I never saw it actually spoken or actually reported. Does that sound like something that Kyle and John would say to a player after what we heard last night, where they were joking about how they would trade each other?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think that's something that they would commonly do unless, a player's agent was very concerned about it and would reach out to them. I thought that was interesting, and the fact that they are clearly shopping him makes me scratch my head on that a little bit. And Deebo is the one that always made the more sense to trade. Like, even if you do take a $22 million cap hit, you're still saving $7 million. He's still a guy on the decline. Like, he's the guy that makes sense if you could get a second rounder for him. So for them to provide that assurance, if that's what they did, and Mike Silver's a very good reporter who's usually locked in on all this stuff, I think that's odd and possibly a little out of character, on their behalf. That said, Deebo is maybe Kyle Shanahan's favorite player of all time, so I could see it. But if that's indeed what they did and then they went out and shopped him, it's a little head-scratching.
Agree with you. Jake Hutchinson, our own on the 49er beat, and is at Niners HQ tonight, and we're talking it out as the second round is underway. The Cardinals trade out of number 35. It is the Falcons now in that pick, and the pick is in. We'll pass it along as soon as it comes in. So, Jake, bigger picture with everything you're saying. Maybe they don't deal anyone tonight. Is there any chance in your mind with the way this is played out that Deebo Samuel is still on the team after this year?
I have a hard time seeing a way that works unless, next year they were to move Aiyuk and Deebo looks like this reinvigorated version of himself. The money, to me, it just doesn't make sense for them to keep him. And he's a guy that, he takes a beating like running backs. Most running backs don't last until, they're 26, 27. And Deebo takes a beating that other wide receivers simply don't. So I really, really don't see a scenario where he's on this team after this year. They'd saved too much money, and he's just been in decline for so long. It doesn't make sense to me.
How does this affect the short to medium term viability of Christian McCaffrey and even George Kittle if they end up keeping Deebo and Brandon Aiyuk gets the big bag and you start to press up against the cap a little bit?
Yeah, I think they're fine if they get rid of Deebo. I mean, they're going to have at least one casualty next year, and I think Deebo's the one that makes sense. Now, I think they will take that, as long as they can, and maybe Kittle looks more in decline than Deebo next year, and he's the casualty. But to me, Deebo is the one where you save the most money. He's the likeliest to still be in decline. And I think McCaffrey has a contract where they can kind of do whatever they want with it. They guarantee him a little bit more money every year, but when they acquired him, they got this basically 3 years, I think $12 million, and none of it was guaranteed. So they can do whatever they want with that deal. I think they'll keep McCaffrey as long as he's still churning. He's obviously a freak of nature and an outlier, but yeah, I think it's Deebo who's going to be the casualty.
Okay, hit the thingamabob there. All right. With the 35th pick, the Atlanta Falcons, I apologize to his whole family. I have no idea how to say this. They are taking Clemson defensive tackle Rook.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, will you say it for me, Jake?
Yep, Rook Orororo. He was a guy I mocked to the 49ers. He's a freak athlete, defensive tackle. That's a good pick.
Okay, give me the name.
Atlanta traded up to get him. Rook Orororo.
Orororo.
Yeah, 3 rows.
Rook Orororo. And listen, I had to practice this a bunch of times. Orororo.
You're a pro, Jake.
Yeah, it sounds like you just came from the dentist when you say it.
Rook Orororo. Yeah.
You sound like you got Novocaine going for sure when you say this name.
Exactly, but he's a guy who launches off the line of scrimmage. He would have been a great fit for the Niners, I think. But yeah, that's an interesting pick for him.
Okay, Washington Commanders right now on the clock. We'll keep you up to date as the picks all roll in. But I mean, the story is, I know that you sort of came on here, Jake, and said that you felt that this was it right away. But picks are coming in hot and heavy. There's already been 2 trades here in this second round, and absolutely nothing involving the 49ers.
Yeah, to me, I think if the 49ers were to get in the second round with a trade for Deebo, I think they'd have to give something up. To me, if it were say Deebo and, a mid-round second rounder and the 49ers give up that Trey Lance pick, which I don't think they want to hold on to at 124, that could be an interesting scenario. If a team maybe at the back of the second round who's in need of a wide receiver and can't get one and wants a guy who they can, dink and dunk the ball to, give him easy targets, that could be interesting, but, we'll see.
With Ororo now off the board and somebody who you mock to the Niners, where do they find that kind of a three technique and an A-gap wrecker, and also be able to address the O-line in the secondary? Are we starting to look at priorities, or are we still in best available mode for the Niners, Jake?
Yeah, I think it's hard to see how it'll play out right now, but I think two guys they'd like at tackle would be Kingsley Suamatia out of BYU and Roger Rosengarten out of Washington.
Yeah.
Those are two guys who intrigued me in the second round for them. I think would be fit sort of developmental guys. At defensive tackle, there's Dwayne Carter at Duke, who's probably going to go a little lighter. But Michael Hall, defensive tackle out of Ohio State, and Johnny Newton, who's still on the board, are both sort of high-end defensive tackles that are still sticking around. But it'll be interesting. The second part of the second round could get a little interesting, and I wouldn't be shocked if Javon Bullard, safety out of Georgia, if he was still there, if they went out and got him.
Jake, what are they doing about cornerback?
Yeah, that's here's the thing. I actually think for the time being, the Niners are not in a terrible spot at corner if they keep Lenore in the slot. I think he's better there. I don't really understand moving him outside. I think they actually have a decent amount of coverage aside from Charvarius Ward. They've got Ambry Thomas, who's whatever. They've got Isaac Yadam. They've got Rock Ya-Sin, who they just picked up, and Darrell Luter Jr., who we didn't see much of, but they were really, really fond of. So that's four guys to compete for one spot. I think that if they address corner, somebody like Renardo Green out of Florida is a really good player. Florida State, he's a really, really good tactical player. He understands the position. But they could go more developmental. There's some guys that are in the 4th, 5th round that could be, sneaky good value. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't know how highly they're going to, evaluate outside corner.
Jake, we talked through a lot there and maybe didn't ask the simplest thing. Do you like what they did last night?
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. It's Ricky Pearsall was a guy that I really fell in love with throughout the draft process. And I think, some people are like, well, he should have been a second rounder. That stuff doesn't matter. If he's a first, second rounder, they weren't going to get him at 63, and he might have been gone by pick 32. You don't know. And, and front offices around the league have raved about Pearsall. You saw C.J. Stroud. That guy understands ball. He's a smart quarterback, and he was, pissed the Niners got him. This is a guy who has so much polish as a receiver, who's so athletic, who just works hard and doesn't care about his own well-being, which is actually pretty important for a receiver going over the middle.
Sounds a lot like the receivers that the 49ers already have going over the middle, so that probably spoke to him. Hey, Jake, great stuff, man. We love having you. Thank you.
Hey, appreciate you guys having me on.
Okay, there it is. Our own